Everyone, and thank you for joining us for the year in review and the year ahead, brought to you by Miles Partnership and our wonderful partners at Focusrite. Hard to believe, but this is actually our 10th edition of this webinar. 10 years we've been doing this. And at this point, I think we're officially a legacy franchise. So I'm waiting for Netflix to call and just sign us up and start distributing content. I'm Karen Mast, your host and facilitator for today's conversation, and I am thrilled to be joined by an exceptional group of colleagues, including C.A. Clark, our Senior Vice President of AI at Miles Partnership, and our brilliant friends from Focusrite, Alicia Schmid, Madeline List, and Mike Coletta. If you've attended in previous years, you know that the insights are sharp, the data is fresh, and the hot takes on traveler behavior just keep getting hotter. I mean, 10 years, people, we are getting older and hotter over here. Yes, that's exactly right. So before we dive in, a few quick housekeeping notes, because what's a webinar without them? We'll be taking questions at the end, so please feel free to drop your thoughts, comments, reactions, and existential travel or world questions into the webinar chat as we go. We love hearing from you, and we'll do our best to address as many questions as time allows. And excuse me. And yes, the slides and additional materials will be available next week at milespartnership.com/year in review 2025. So you don't need to frantically screenshot anything. I see a lot of AI, Firefly note takers, etc. But if you feel free to screenshot or scribble notes, and that's your preferred method of note taking, go for it. Live your truth. I'm here to support you on your journey. So now that we've covered the essentials, let's get into why we're here today. We are going to be exploring some of the most fascinating shifts shaping travel in 2025, organized really around three key themes. Number one, travel trends and the spotlight on the indulgent traveler. Two, AI innovation and disruption. And finally, three, engaging with loyalty in travel. It is a dynamic landscape, rapid change, emerging behaviors, and a lot of opportunity for those brands that are paying attention. I promise by the end of this session, you'll have a clearer view of where the industry is heading and what it means for all of us. So to kick things off, I'm delighted to turn it over to the incomparable Alicia Schmid, Head of Research at Focusrite. Alicia, take it away. Alicia's going to take it away, not on mute, so we'll give her a second. Okay.
And I can't find my camera, so I'm just going to start talking. All
Go
right.
for it.
First, we're going to take a quick look at travel overall. Economic pressures and geopolitical uncertainties impacted the US and Europe, but resilient demand continued to fuel growth overall. European travels are taking more international leisure trips, including hybrid that combines work and leisure, resulting in the increase that we are seeing in our survey data, particularly for UK and Germany, where the percentage of the adult population traveling has been increasing post-pandemic. So we're really now back to pre-pandemic levels. France and the US were relatively flat, but on the downside of flat. Now, these two countries, really in particular, had some geopolitical worries over the past year. So, looking at travel as a priority for discretionary spend, we see a similar story. UK and Germany had an uptick, while France and the US really were relatively more flat. However, there really was a significant difference between the US and the rest of these countries when it came to discretionary spend. For the US, leisure travel had a significant decline last year, but it still remained a top priority. But this year, travel is no longer a top priority for discretionary spend. Other items like home improvement and electronics became a higher spend, pushing leisure travel to third on the list. Now, focusing on the just the US, paying for other basic needs eclipsed travel in importance, particularly for the millennials. Now, this group is in the stage of becoming or are parents of young children and buying new homes, which is likely probably driving that need for home improvements. Now, all that said, there is a resilient group of travelers that are continuing to splurge. And at Focusrite, we are calling them indulgent explorers. Now, this is based on a significant per person per day spend that excludes airfare. And it's for one of their leisure trips. Now, these travelers, while a smaller proportion of the traveling population, are a valuable group who spend more, travel more, and their habits are different. They represent, at least the second half of 2025, about 1/6 of the traveling population. Now, they're younger, but their median household income is about 60% higher than that of everyone else. And at an average of 10.6 days per year, they have about the same number of vacation days as everyone else. Now, these travelers take more and longer trips. 40% of them said that they took at least one trip that was 14 days longer. They're more likely to take a trip that and extend it for business, or take a business trip and extend it for leisure time. They spend 159% more than everyone else on trip components like lodging, airfare, car rental, and in-destination activities. And they spend 283% more on while in destination. So this could include food and beverage, transportation, or souvenirs. So while they might be a smaller part of visitation to an area, they certainly are a large portion of the spend to a destination. Now, this traveling cohort has a desire to see the world, and they're doing it. And while they do take trips within the US, they are much more likely to be taking international trips compared to others. And despite having the same amount of vacation as everyone else, that flexibility of working from anywhere might be supporting these more frequent, longer trips that are further away. Now, of their many trips, they are seeking rest and relaxation like the rest of us, but they are also traveling for other reasons that many of us don't, particularly adventure and wellness and exclusive experience, maybe like lavish retreats. Similarly, for their types of destinations they like to go to, um, they take trips to big cities and the beach. But they are more likely to be going on safaris and to deserts. Maybe that is to fulfill their need of adventure. So, when building experiences and marketing to these indulgent explorers, you are more likely to get their attention with the less common trip purposes and destinations. And by capturing them with these more niche experiences, you're more likely to have their business for maybe the rest of their trips as well. So now you have the why they take their trips and where they're going. Now you need to know how to reach them. So when researching and planning trips, friends and family is a top resource among their travelers, like everybody. But for indulgent explorers, offline is especially important. They can be found calling travel suppliers, getting advice from travel advisors, and turning to print media. So just in general, offline has a greater influence for these travelers. So that's not to say that they aren't using online resources too. With the exception of general search, they use online resources more than everyone else. They spend more on travel and they take more trips. So they're likely doing more research. But indulgent explorers stand out for their use of wholesale clubs, Gen AI platforms, financial institutions, and DMO sites compared to other travelers. So maybe local advisors could be a valuable partnership for DMOs. So, despite the influence of offline resources for trip planning, these travelers are more tech savvy than everyone else. Nearly 3/4 agreed with this statement. I seek out and enjoy being an early adopter of new technology. So this might explain why, in part, their usage of newer forms of payments. They are at least 2 times more likely to use online payment platforms, mobile payments, digital wallets, buy now, pay later options, and crypto to pay for their trip components like hotels, airfare, car rentals, and in-destination activities. So for a quick minute, I want to just now zoom out and look at like where the future of payments might be going and look at total travelers for a minute. When we look at the usage by generation, we kind of see we see different behaviors. So baby boomers are still all about the traditional credit cards. Gen X are a little more likely to be using newer forms of payment, but compared to their baby boomers. But they really are more likely to be using online payment platforms, which makes sense because PayPal has been around for a while and is more established. But barring any new payment method disruptors entering the market, we can clearly see where the future of payments is going when we look at the usage of Gen Z and millennials of digital wallets, buy now, pay later, and crypto. So back to indulgent explorers, they're adopting AI at a greater rate, using it for trips and making trip decisions based on its results, looking at the top decisions they make. It signals the need to optimize local marketing efforts for AI, transportation, food and beverage, where the top decision is made based on these results of an AI query and then followed by guided tours. And while they are more resilient to the economic downturns, they are more determined to keep travel as a key part of their life. So nearly 3/4 of indulgent explorers are willing to give up spending on other non-travel items to save for travel. If they did have to cut some of their trip elements, at the top would be shopping while in destination and taking trips off season. But they don't want to stay further away, and no one was willing to give up on their in-destination activities. So given that indulgent explorers are more frequent travelers, fewer feeling less comfortable than they were the same time last year. In fact, more than 2/3 feel more comfortable traveling within the US than they were last year. And more than half are feeling more comfortable going internationally. But what's interesting is that when I looked at frequency among all travelers, you saw this same level of comfort among those that took 6 or more trips. And these travelers take an average of 4. So maybe some of their accommodations that they book make them feel more comfortable. But despite the comfort they feel now, when we look towards the future, there is a concern for safety traveling abroad. So the current socioeconomic climate inside and outside of the US is likely contributing to this. So inflation, declining consumer confidence, elevated travel costs, tightening of purse strings, shifting priorities, have everybody ready to pivot, even our most resilient indulgent explorers. Now, Karen, back to you.
Thanks, Alicia. So obviously, with that economic uncertainty in consumer and spending, we're seeing a lot of destinations and hospitality companies targeting these individuals. We believe, given the priority for travel, that they are sort of recession-proof, if you will. And so what we're seeing from case studies and examples coming out in late 2025 for what organizations are doing is that they're finally recognizing that these travelers are not a one-size-fits-all. Income alone doesn't predict preference. So nor does age, quite frankly. So Deloitte's holiday travel survey, if you take a look at that in conjunction with the Focusrite research that Alicia just presented, shows that there's stark differences between frequent travelers who have higher expectation for service and on-property experiences and laptop luggers who place less emphasis on service and more on property dining when selecting accommodation. So they do have some items in common. As Alicia noted, there's an interest in wellness, culinary experiences, and of course, finding value right now. So a couple of examples. Let's see, we've got this one here from coming out of the Ritz-Carlton and what Mandara is doing, Mandapa, excuse me, right? Mandapa is specifically looking at, with Marriott, packaging holistic, research-driven wellness as a new status in luxury. They're turning sleep, nutrition, and mental health into premium bookable journeys at top-tier resorts like this one. In late 2025, Marriott rolled out the Luxury Wellness Series across 3 of their flagship resorts. And they're giving things like their guests Balinese medicinal plant workshops, chef-led foraging tours, and guided meditation in the jungle, essentially using wellness as a curated, local, story-driven experience rather than a generic spa menu. All of these programs are built around sleep, nutrition, and physical and mental well-being, which speak directly to indulgent explorers who see wellness as a high-value investment and not an add-on. Another great example and new on the scene is Appalachian Hotels. So this is coming out of California. They treat the entire property as a culinary and design canvas. They're baking food, drinking wine, and bringing local craft directly into the architecture and guest flow rather than treating it as a separate function. They have a culinary first philosophy with Chef Charlie Palmer and Four Seasons veteran Christopher Hunsberger. They welcome guests not at a check-in desk, but actually in a kitchen-inspired reception area where guests are greeted with bites and drinks. For them, luxury isn't defined by opulence, but by access to makers, ingredients, and a sense of place. It's a perfect example of how indulgent travelers or indulgent explorers are gravitating towards experiences that feel crafted, immersive, and story rich. The value isn't really what they consume, but in how deeply they can engage. And finally, another example on how people are reaching out to the indulgent explorers, it's Casa de Campo. So 50 years in the making, for those of you who know this property down in the Dominican Republic, they've repositioned all-inclusive for this indulgent segment. It's more about convenience and culinary exploration and villa life and less about value. It's about convenience. So they are framing it as simplification for affluent guests. It wraps multi-restaurant dining, activities, and resort privileges into one purchase, really removing friction, but reserving choice. You can bounce between fine dining venues, but also stay in a luxury villa, which is unusual for an all-inclusive package. So this works for multi-gen group and high-spend families. And in the destination space, let's not rule them out. Embracing the idea that luxury is all about how you define it. We're seeing destinations curate their signature experiences into user-friendly marketing materials and custom landing pages on their website. Here, Greenville, South Carolina illustrates how luxury can range from unique dining or cocktail experiences to special events, boutique lodging, and even how technology is changing spa and wellness. They mention here that they've got this great ultra cold cryotherapy experience as part of their luxury amenities. So remember, bundle up for that. But that's not the cryotherapy isn't the only technology we're going to be talking about. We are certainly going to be talking about AI today and how that's disrupting not only what indulgent explorers are looking for and what technologies you're using, but just technology in general. So before we kick this over to Mike, who's going to be sharing some research, I'd like to bring up a survey real quick for all of you, the attendees, to take a look at what describes your current activities on AI. Now, I want you here to select everything that applies. Are you still testing and piloting AI solutions? Do you actually have policies at your organization that are guiding sort of these back office areas or the policies guiding your employees and your philosophy around AI? We want to take a look at this in comparison to how this was treated last year in 2024, because we ran this same survey. And last year, it was, AI not new on the scene by any means, but we still saw some, I don't know, I'd say relatively young answers here. And I think we're going to see some differences. For example, last year, only 23% of our attendees at this webinar had policies guiding your use of AI. So we believe that as the poll ends, we will start to see that more people actually have policies in place. Similarly, some people didn't even have specific activities at their organization. They were still reviewing AI. So we hope to see that that has increased. So as Mike is bringing up his slides and we're getting started there, let's go ahead and close this survey, and we will go ahead and kick this over to Mike Coletta, Senior Manager of Research and Innovation, and I'll come back and share more of these results. Oh, it looks like we have some of them right here. Hang on a second, guys. So use of AI in marketing and communications. Thank you for this. I'm glad to see the increase. Last year, we were only at 54%. Now we're at 61. I'm very pleased to see that some of you are trying and using AI within your own organizations. Policies have increased. Not that we want more bureaucracy in life, but come on, like we've got to have some sort of guidance for our employees. You have moved from 23% having policies to 39%. So it looks like our philosophies and our usage of AI, we're kind of grounding those in a common conversation in our organizations, and I appreciate that very much. Okay, so as I said, we're going to bring up Mike Coletta. Mike is going to kick us off with, Mike, Senior Manager of Research and Innovation from Focusrite, and start talking about what's going on with AI, and then we'll move to C.A. Clark. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Today, I'll be presenting some key data points from recent Focusrite research studies on usage of AI among both travel businesses as well as travelers themselves that show the trajectory the industry is on, and then I'll close with a few observations. So we'll see if my stats line up with the Snap poll you just did. And we will start with the recent global B2B survey. So this was a survey of travel executives on use of AI in their business. So first we asked survey takers how their companies are using AI. We found that 83% of businesses overall are now using it in some capacity, 73% for internal processes and purposes, and exactly half are using it in customer-facing products. 13% not using it yet, but actively exploring use cases. Just 1% said they have no plans to use it. So we'll see how that lines up when Karen revisits those stats. It's pretty impressive to see that so many travel businesses, 88% overall, say AI has had either major or minor positive impact on their business. 45% said major, 43% said minor, only 8% said neutral or no impact. Literally, no one said that they were seeing negative impact. And we asked about current and planned use of agentic AI, meaning AI that goes beyond just giving you back information or images, but actively executes tasks and carries out work. And we were a bit surprised to find that over 60% of travel businesses are at least experimenting with or are already scaling it. So it's only 6% of businesses that are actively scaling agentic AI already, 22% that have started scaling in limited fashion, a full third are actively just experimenting with it. Another 23% aren't using agentic yet, but have plans to start soon. Only 9% not using it and have no plans to adopt it. So it's especially early days for agentic AI, but there is a lot of momentum already. And then over to our consumer research, where we see clearly that AI is really starting to have a big impact on traveler behavior. So this data is from a couple of US traveler surveys fielded this year. And just in 2025, we measured a big jump to 39% of all US travelers using AI in some form for researching and planning their trips, either in the major platforms like ChatGPT or in AI-powered search engines like Google's AI Mode, or using AI inside travel apps or websites. So this is up from 33% just earlier in the year and from 28% last year. So to confirm, I think as we all know, AI really picked up pace this year and is truly going mainstream in travel planning. But this heavy usage is really starting to shift the landscape now, and this is a big deal. So here we're looking at the top online resources that travelers are using for researching and selecting travel components like their flights and hotels since mid-2023. And we see things are fairly steady from 2023 into 2024 for general search engines on the black line, travel review sites on the red line, and social networks on the green line. Then early 2025, there was a significant drop in the use of general search engines as well as travel review sites, while social networks and AI platforms, this would be just the dedicated platforms here, like ChatGPT that we're measuring, those ticked up. And then just as of September 2025, there was a further sharp drop in search engines. So going from half of travelers using them in mid 2023 down, down to close to a third, and a sharp uptick in the AI platforms, more than doubling from 2024 to 15%. So really big shifts now underway in the resources people are using for trip research, seemingly mainly due to AI. And then this was from a survey from the first half of the year. A quarter to a third of travelers across geographies were already interested in booking travel within an AI platform like inside ChatGPT, or letting an AI assistant like ChatGPT's operator book for them on the web. So e-commerce is just starting to be implemented in AI for simple retail products like t-shirts and coffee cups. But travel is so much more complex when you consider the full scope, the multitude of booking options, price volatility, loyalty redemptions, upgrades and ancillaries, and multi-party fulfillment. So there's a long way to go still in travel until it all works, but the consumer interest is there. And as we look to 2026 and beyond and what this all means, what I'm observing is a bifurcation of possible paths across a few critical areas. The promise of unbiased, intelligent AI agents that offer highly personalized recommendations and seamless booking could take a few different directions. So while Meta and Apple and the other tech giants are wildcards as they develop their AI offerings, for now, at least in the West, it seems to be coming down to Google versus ChatGPT in terms of who will own the traveler in the AI world and which business models will prevail. And for Google, a study we partnered on with travel marketing agency Propellic in the summer found that Google's AI mode, which is rapidly becoming the default way to search, in AI mode, local business profiles were very prominent, and through them, 80% of users went operator direct rather than to OTAs at only 13%. So AI mode seems to favor tour providers, hotel properties, etc., rather than OTAs. But meanwhile, ChatGPT has initially partnered with OTAs on launching apps inside the platform and hasn't opened up the ecosystem to smaller players directly, at least yet, although an open app store of sorts is supposedly coming soon. But then just a few weeks ago at the Focusrite conference, we heard Google say that the agentic booking model will likely be similar to their current model, which means ad-driven, which to me implies that it will continue to favor OTAs. And meanwhile, Sam Altman from ChatGPT recently said on a podcast, and speaking about travel, I think for the first time ever, speaking about it directly, he said if ChatGPT shows you the best hotel and it takes the same cut it would take from any other hotel, I think that's probably okay. Meaning he wants to stay away from ads that have historically benefited OTAs and implement more of a flat compensation structure that gives all companies equal footing regardless of size. And ChatGPT was working on ads, but recently paused those efforts to focus on the core product. So mixed signals from both companies on how they'll monetize AI and what types of businesses will be favored in their ecosystems. And then there's a bifurcation happening in the interfaces through which travelers access AI. So the question is whether people will want to do all their planning and booking inside an AI platform like ChatGPT or Gemini, or Google's AI mode, which is the video on the left, where all the information has to be brought into the platform and re-presented there. As opposed to using an agentic browser like ChatGPT's Atlas on the right, where you can have the conversation, but you're out on the web viewing websites and content, including social media and images and video, as they were intended to be presented. So agentic browsing is still not a great experience. I think it could improve a lot. And I like the idea that it travels around the web with you rather than keeping you kind of trapped in the platform. And as some of you may know, there is a lawsuit between Perplexity and Amazon right now that may determine how some of this plays out. And then I see a bifurcation happening between organizations that are AI native versus those who aren't, or those who are actively architecting their businesses around AI versus holding on to legacy processes and systems. So there are many well-publicized studies by McKinsey, by MIT, and others that seem to imply that the ROI of AI is very much in question. And that would be per the New York Times article on the right. But there's tons of anecdotal evidence in the press and especially in the startup and VC communities and the AI community, and even the survey results I showed indicating that AI is having a very positive impact and in particular helping companies move a lot faster or even rethinking their businesses from the ground up. And I think it's likely that AI and agentic AI in particular will become the major competitive differentiator in 2026. So these are my areas to watch where I see very different possible paths with very different implications for the industry and how they unfold in 2026. And I view this as a very critical time in terms of decision making. Our theme at the Focusrite conference this past November was Game On, meaning now is truly the time to act and to get in the game because AI is proving itself and it will improve a lot in 2026 with better memory and even the ability to self-improve is coming. So the paths chosen on AI strategy next year by the big tech companies, but also inside every company, could determine competitive edge and the overarching business landscape for the next decade or more. Thank you. Back to you, Karen.
I think it's over to me. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. So as many of you probably know, or some of you know, one of the things I look after at Miles is our AI Opener program, which is a global collaborative exploration of generative AI technologies and the implications for destination organizations. We've run this program in North America since January of 2024 in partnership with Group Now, who runs the European version and initiated that program. The what we've done in that program is for over those last couple of years, we have explored various topics that are at the intersection of AI and travel. And we've had over 100 participating destinations. We've heard insights from Google, Microsoft, Adobe, Getty, and dozens of AI native travel companies, academics, destinations, and in total more than 80 hours of content that has been produced there. We've explored many of the trends and the bifurcations that Mike was just talking about, and I thought I would pick three here to just sort of piggyback and talk a little bit more about. So the three I picked were agents, search, and then that idea of organizational value. So I'll share some of the key takeaways from the sessions that explored those. In March, we did a whole session on agents that was looking at what agentic AI means. That was obviously a little bit earlier in the process, and many more things have come out since then. But looking at how it was impacting both what we do internally in the form of automating or streamlining human tasks, and particularly the importance of examining and thinking about the data that we have, and how that data is formatted to make it useful for agents. Perhaps more importantly, the ways that agentic capabilities will change how our websites, our content, our data are accessed and interpreted. We also covered one of the core debates that Mike mentioned, which is will agentic AI benefit the small independent operator or further entrench the big players. One of the presenters there, I don't know if he's on the call today, but Christian Watts was on there, and we had a really good conversation about that sort of balance between those. Obviously, no one knows where that will come out, but there are very strong opinions on both sides of that argument about whether it will benefit the small or the larger players. In April, we had a really good session that explored impacts to search and discovery. And at that point, we could see that there were really significant impacts to organic traffic. We couldn't really quantify the size of that shift at the time, but Mike has just given us some really good updated data on that. So a year ago, 50% of the respondents in that survey said they use general search in their planning process. Today, that number is 34%. So that's a really good indicator kind of showing us, what is happening there. If we think about the key takeaways from that, we had several different people who were on that call. One of my favorite presenters that we had in AI Opener was Chris Andrew from Scrunch, and he sort of described the process as being where we've outsourced browsing to AI without really acknowledging that we're doing that, and we're viewing fewer websites because of that. And focusing on answers rather than sites. So there's some really interesting inputs there. Some of the takeaways were that SEO fundamentals are still really critical. We need to think about reprioritizing metrics, and we need to focus on the kinds of things that AIs aren't very good at. And then lastly, in September, we explored kind of how we can solve problems with AI inside our own organizations. And I think there's some critical takeaways here that I suspect make up the difference between organizations that get value from AI and ones that don't. So another one of my favorite presenters from 2025 was Rick Dakin, who developed the framework that Anthropic uses for their AI fluency course. And he talked a lot about these sort of two components of problem solving. One is being able to articulate the problem, which often gets missed, but theoretically anyone should be able to do that. But the other side of that is really having this deep knowledge of what the platforms are capable of, and being able to connect those two things, right? Being able to say what the problem is and then breaking the problem into pieces that an AI is good at are really the two critical components. And I suspect if we think about if we were to dive into some of those studies or some of those observations that we're seeing in the press about organizations that either do or don't get value out of it, I suspect we would see really stark differences in terms of how the people in those organizations are prepared, and how they go about solving those problems. Some really interesting stuff that happened in that one. And then real quickly, I will just wrap up here with two opportunities for you. So one of the things about AI Opener is because it is a subscription-based sort of a process that we don't have an opportunity to kind of publicize and get public input on some of these topics. So next week, we are having an AI roundtable for destinations where we're going to explore some of these three or four different topics. And we'll have representatives from Vancouver and Austin and Miami and Brand USA who will be joining us to talk more about what those issues are. So that one is free. That one is next week. There's a QR code. We encourage you to join us for that webinar and listen to what the destinations have to say. And then also a quick plug for our AI Opener 2026 program, which will be expanding, not just destinations. So any travel organizations at all can join. We're going to do 5 sessions in 6 months. We're going to be focused on really practical outcomes. And so everyone who is participating will get a Claude team account for the length of that program. So we'll actually be able to do things together, and we'll build, projects and skills and all kinds of stuff in Claude. And the cost there for that program, you can do an individual membership. So please join us and join our growing community of AI travel professionals. And now back to Karen.
Okay, thank you, CA and Mike. I was reflecting on some of the research you shared, and one that particularly struck me was when Mike shared the statistic about US travelers, and that 32% would be willing to let agentic AI book their airline flights for them. And personally, for me, I was thinking that I would much rather have an agentic AI tool book that flight than my own mother, because the chances of them booking the right day and the right airport are so much greater than my mother doing it. So I'll let you guys reflect on that for yourself. But next up is Madeline List. Madeline is the manager of research and special projects. And the third trend we're going to be exploring today is loyalty, right? Like what's really happening with travel loyalty, and how have disruptors such as the economy and the use of AI sort of reframed loyalty and what we need to focus on going into the year ahead. So I will let Madeline kick us off.
Thank you. So this year I led a study that was on travel loyalty, and I want to put some context into the way that we thought about making this study and setting it up, because When many people hear that term, we know the associations that come to mind. They're thinking the lounges, the points, the miles, the status, the upgrades. And I have a lot of sympathy for where those associations come from. But it struck us that those current associations we have with the term seem to be a very far cry from the literal dictionary definition of the term loyalty, which is primarily the third one that I've featured here from the dictionary, an example or instance of faithfulness, adherence, or the like, which in the travel world translates to repeat brand patronage or repeat destination visitation. We really wanted to understand what drove people back to using the same providers or going to the same places over and over again. And if that was points, then that's an amazing vehicle to achieve that. But we were very open-minded to the fact that there could be many factors other than points that really influence that. So, what I want to start with here is a baseline of what percentage of US leisure travelers have go-to brands that they prefer over others for these two verticals for airlines and lodging. And the interesting thing here is that it was the minority of people who even had a favorite. And that's important because once you have a brand that you want to prioritize over others, that's where you can build real loyalty, start to go back to them over and over again. But for now, it's not the majority of travelers who really have that kind of favorite, and it's similar between airlines and lodging. When we look into the history of what gives people that favorite brand, how it earns its go-to status, the fundamentals still matter quite a lot when designating a travel brand as a favorite. And some of the things that come up as important when travelers tell us how they chose a brand to prioritize over others are such fundamental business practices that I almost worried they were going to be boring. So if we look at the ones for an airline, the top features here that were important were things like good value for the money, competitive prices, making sure the flights depart and arrive on time, that the routes themselves worked for people, that they were convenient departure or arrival times throughout the day. So these things that make a good product and a well-priced product really came first before people thought about the loyalty program. In air, loyalty program just missed the top 5 in terms of how people chose their favorite brand. But for hotel brands, we see that loyalty programs do work their way into one of those top 5 selection criteria for picking a favorite. And then other ones here that are still really important go back to those business fundamentals, the good value for the money, the cleanliness, that competitive pricing, and also the amenities that a hotel brand is able to offer. Something interesting here is that new destinations can drive travelers to new providers. And we see that there are some travelers who are going to new destinations more than others, which really mixes up some of the providers that can even be available to them when they go on any given leisure trip. So in the overall a population of leisure travelers, 40% said that they had visited their destination for the very first time on their most recent trip. But when we look at that broken down by age, we see some massive, massive differences. Gen Z is far more likely than other generations to go to a place for the first time. And that goes progressively downwards as the generations move up. So that has huge implications because every time you go to a new destination, you can be putting yourself outside the service network of your favorite providers and putting yourself in a situation where there's regional providers operating there that you might not be as familiar with as a traveler. We expect this to continue also, even as Gen Z ages, at least to some extent, because they express it as a value system as well, and not just as something they're doing because they're younger, they haven't had as much time to go to places on a repeat basis, but they are purposely seeking out new destinations as part of their travel value system. And then another complicating thing here when it comes to the younger generations as well is that they're traveling internationally more frequently, and that as well can put them into a very different network of service providers. So when we've taken all those things into account, looked at the business fundamentals, looked at whether somebody is even in the right service network to be able to use brands repeatedly, then we can start talking about the programs more critically. Once we've covered the pricing strategy, the product quality, all of those things, The programs do still matter because we see people are using them quite extensively. Almost half, or a little over half, of leisure travelers paid for at least one travel component through redemption on their most recent trip, which might be exacerbated by the economic constraints we're in. It reduces the cash outlay people have to put out. But it's still quite significant. And then the currencies they're using do vary a lot by generations, but it confirms some of the stereotypes that we see here. 2 in 3 millennials who made a redemption used credit card points, whereas provider points and miles were much more favored by the boomers and the silent generation. And while I did mention that it becomes more complicated to choose international destinations because you can be dealing with some very different travel brands and providers there, I do want to express that redemptions are still super important to them. We see massively higher rates of redemption from people who traveled internationally on most recent trips compared to the people who were exclusively domestic in their recent itinerary. And when I mentioned that the economic constraints were likely part of what was driving the redemption rate so high, this is some of the data that led us to this conclusion because we asked people what the advantages were to redeeming. And a lot of the top ones were really financial, like reducing the out-of-pocket cost of the trip. But what's also going to be really important to people today in this webinar are the second one, which is relatively even across generations, that redeeming can make expensive trips or destinations more accessible for them. So having redemption options with the travel providers available in your area can, for some people, make the difference in terms of whether they're coming or not, especially if you're considered to be a higher cost destination. And they're still gaming the system hard. The vast majority, 84% of leisure travelers engaged in some kind of gaming behavior in the past 12 months, like buying themselves gift cards, opening a credit card with the intention to close it soon, using a provider just to maintain status if they wouldn't otherwise use them, or making purchases completely on behalf of someone else just to earn the points. However, when you see that people are engaging so hard in the loyalty programs, I want there to be some nuance in how you approach this, because just because somebody is using loyalty programs a lot does not mean that they are truly loyal travelers, because travel consistency can be such a fickle thing. Remember those numbers I put on before about the people who were open to many brands versus had favorites? We asked the people with favorite brands, when was the last time they used something else and not just their favorite? And for the majority of people, they're still using other brands that are out there for them. So having that product fit that works for people, making sure that there are options for them, making sure the pricing is right, and also making sure that the loyalty program is there to offer them some value through the experience is really important, because even the travelers who have favorites are often still put in situations where their favorites might not be an option to be bookable on any given trip. If there's one major point to impress here, it's that loyalty is really the sum of the all-around experience with a brand. It is not just an exclusive interaction with a program that makes someone loyal. And I hope this data helps you to think about it more holistically. I will hand it now back to the Miles team.
All right, thanks, Madeline. It's interesting that loyalty is kind of coming up similar to the indulgent explorers, right? That people are not all one and the same. And as we think about loyalty, to me, the story in 2025 is that travelers aren't necessarily responding solely to points and transactions alone, right? They're gravitating towards programs that reflect their values, offer richer access, open up new destinations, and create a genuine sense of belonging. So I'm going to share 3 examples that show how destinations, airlines, and brands are evolving loyalty in real time. For example, Copenhagen is showing us that loyalty doesn't have to be a points game at all. It actually can be built on shared values. In 2024, they piloted a program called CopenPay and have since expanded it in 2025. And this rewards travelers not for spend, but for behavior. If you arrive by train, bike, you use clean transportation, or even join in on a canal cleanup, you can earn free cultural experiences, museum entry, sauna sessions, bike rentals, etc. And what this signals is that for them, there's a shift toward value-based loyalty, where visitors feel connected to a destination because they feel aligned with its ethics, its identity, and what they're trying to accomplish as a community. So instead of chasing discounts alone, travelers can become advocates, posting, sharing, encouraging others to travel the Copenhagen way in this case. And that's really attitudinal loyalty in action, less about the transaction, more about the attitude. They belong, they have pride and participation, and it's very different than a transaction or a discount in terms of loyalty in a destination. Now, Air New Zealand, a little bit different. They're taking loyalty into the realm of cultural identity and emotional connection. In 2025, we saw them begin a major transformation of their loyalty program, rebranding AirPoints as Koru, named after Maori symbol of renewal and connection. They also introduced Koru Black, an elite ultra tier with elevated recognition, access, and personal benefits. But the most important shift here is really structural. If you are in the Koru circle, you basically get to share status perks with close contacts. And for those of you domestically who are part of the United Airlines loyalty program, you might have also noticed that they introduced something similar where you can now tie your reservation with any other person on that flight and share your status with them. So they might get upgraded to Economy Plus or even first class similar to you, even though you're on a different reservation. So now loyalty is starting to become a community experience. It's not a solitary one. I can kind of share my pride in belonging to this program, which starts to move towards that attitudinal loyalty as well. Membership in these programs is about identity as much as it is about upgrades, reinforcing why travelers choose one airline over another, even when price or schedule isn't optimal. And finally, Hilton. So this announcement came out 3 days ago, so I'm excited to share this one. Hilton is really redefining loyalty by expanding its beyond hotel nights and into this high value, high emotion experience. They introduced Hilton Honors Adventure, which is a major evolution of its loyalty ecosystem built around curated journeys. So again, going back to the research Madeline shared with us about how people are wanting to tap into new destinations or things they couldn't necessarily explore without redemption. They've entered into a partnership with Explorer Journeys as their luxury ocean partner. You can book, earn, and redeem on small ship culinary forward cruises across the Mediterranean, Caribbean, Alaska, etc. And this is really loyalty as access to new destinations, new modes of travel, new ways to use and earn rewards. And the brand messaging here, I think, is really about the connection, right? The meaningful discovery. And it's a deliberate move away from just the transactional earn and burn mechanics into like emotional language of exploration and transformation. And it speaks to both existing members looking for really rich ways to use their points and new travelers who want memberships that open doors, not just deliver discounts. Okay, so across all three areas we explored today, AI is accelerating use of travel, using AI, the evolving expectations of indulgent luxury travelers and those sort of recession-proof travelers, and the shift toward value-based experiential loyalty. I think the takeaway here today is the same. Travelers are changing faster than many brands are, and they're not all one size fits all, which makes it even more complicated. So as organizations that we see winning going into 2026, they'll be the ones adapting with intention, creativity, and a much deeper understanding of what truly motivates their audiences. Now, you have some time here. We have a couple of minutes to take questions from Q&A. Uncertain if anybody's put something in the chat, but we certainly want it. One person's asked whether or not there are resources that give an indication of how effective behavioral rewards are compared with points-based programs. And I would say, yes, Madeline can probably speak to this as well. I've got a ton of research that I can share afterwards. If you want to send an email to me, Ekaterina, please do so. I'll share my research with you on the difference between behavioral loyalty and attitudinal loyalty. I know Focusrite has some as well, so they'll certainly share. And in fact, maybe now is a good time for Mitra, the SVP at Focusrite, to share some of the resources she has available for you after the webinar. And then I'll share a couple and we'll wrap up here at the end in the next couple of minutes. So Mitra, why don't you go ahead with the time we have left and share some of your resources.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you, CA. And thanks to my colleagues, Mike, Alicia, and Madeline, for sharing what we hope has been very interesting and useful data and analysis for you. So yes, we have some final Focusrite items to share. A lot of these have a QR code, but of course, as you know, you'll get these slides later so you can scan them on your own time. So first, we want to provide more information about Focusrite's open access subscription. This gives you full access to our syndicated content, and this code will take you to a page with some specific information about the benefits for those of you working in destination marketing and management. And then we also want to give you a taste of what that open access subscription offers. So we're giving you this report for free. Mike wrote this based on a webinar he hosted earlier this year about the impact of AI on the in-destination experience. So once you scan that code, you can enter the code holiday25 to access that report at no charge. And then just yesterday, we released our latest report. This has come to be one of our most popular products we produce. It's called Travel Forward, Data, Insights, and Trends for 2026. This QR code will take you straight to this free report that provides a wide range of data and analysis, including market sizing, consumer travel trends, and data on short-term rentals, corporate travel, luxury, loyalty, and startups. And it's the only report that we provide for free that has this much useful information and proprietary data in it. And then also please make plans to join us January 15th for a webinar where we will dive into that report, and the details will be on the resource page. Next, I just want to mention two additional events. The one you see here, we are hosting a brand new Focusrite Executive Summit in New York City. It will be March 24th on the topic of travel marketing and AI. And we certainly hope to see you there. And then finally, our biggest annual event, of course, is the Focusrite Conference. It will be in Fort Lauderdale this November. You may have seen our coverage of this year's event currently running on FocusWire. Chris and CA were with us this year. I think they can vouch that it is one not to miss. And then finally, this QR code that you see here will take you to the resource page that we have put together. You will find all of the reports related to the research that Alicia, Mike, and Madeline have shared, as well as a variety of other links that we think will be useful. Karen, back to you.
Thanks, Mitra. Much appreciated. So as we're wrapping things up, I want to remind everybody that you can find all of these resources, the slide deck today, as well as links over to Focusrite's Resource Center at milespartnership.com, Year in Review 2025. We are so incredibly pleased to have all of that available to you and our partnership at Focusrite. We also have, of course, more information on the AI Roundtable for Destinations coming up next week. You'll see many familiar faces there, including Jeanette from Brand USA, and Maria from Miami. So please join us for that alongside CA Clark. Finally, I just want to say thank you to our incredible panelists, and thanks to everyone who spent this hour with us. I also want to give a shout out to my mom, who in a twist of fate called me directly after I referenced her today. So if she's here, thanks, Mom. We appreciate your time, your questions, and your curiosity. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season and an excellent start to the new year. We're looking forward to seeing you all in 2026. So thanks, everybody.